This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 164 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and special thanks to Private Internet Access. I've been a customer of Private Internet Access for 3 years now, and I love this service. I was at a security conference a few years back, and I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and immediately my endpoint protection software started alerting me that I was being attempted to be hacked, and I guess you could expect that from a security conference. But anyway, I launched my VPN from Private Internet Access, and all the attempts just stopped. My data and the internet connection is now secure with Private Internet Access, and I've been using their service again for 3 years, and I love it. I love the fact that you can choose different geographical locations, so you can test things like how your DNS is resolving and use it for many different reasons. But that's one definite use case for the different geolocations that you can choose with Private Internet Access. And you can get your VPN starting at $3.33 per month. Yes, that's right, $3.33 per month by going to geekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show I've got Amy Posey, and she is the founder and CEO of Super Mega Boss, a manager training company, and her co-author Kevin have written a book called Wild Success that I've been consuming on Audible. It's a great great listen to and great read if you guys want to pick up the hardback book as well. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So if you don't mind telling the audience just a little bit about kind of your history, your journey, your career path or whatever that has led you to where you are today.
Sure. It's been an interesting ride that I think I probably couldn't have scripted this story way back when. So I actually started my career as a high school English teacher. So I'm a bit of a geek of all trades. So I started college trying to study engineering, ended up and landed in poetry, which was an interesting shift. Taught high school for a few years, and then because of my experience in schools, I ended up working as a consultant and doing public sector consulting. And then that led me into the business world. And so I worked for Deloitte for 10 years and then took a pause, went and got my MBA to be able to speak more of a business language. And then came back from some time overseas, moved to Silicon Valley, started working with tech companies and got really interested in how people work together in tech companies, where ideas came from, where innovation happens. And so I spent a lot of time in a lot of the big tech companies, including a couple of years at Apple, have worked at Google, HP, Cisco. So worked with a lot of different people in tech companies. And then about 10 years ago, decided to move from big consulting to small consulting. And because I was taking a lot of fun, adventurous trips and wanted to kind of weave a little bit more adventure into my life, found a company that used to be called Peak Teams, now is called the AIP Group, which was essentially a bunch of adventurers who would go out and film their exploits and talk about the leadership lessons that they learned from climbing mountains and crossing oceans and going to the Arctic, and what they learned from working as individuals and teams. And so I started to do that work, and it started to get really interested in behavior and what are the behaviors and traits of successful people, and ended up going back to school, getting a master's in neuroscience to kind of unlock what's happening in our brains and our behavior, and really got fascinated by it, went deep, still working with a lot of tech clients, and really fascinating, and spending that time sort of blending the adventure world with the business world, with the science world, and sort of uncovering a lot of interesting lessons and conversations and stories for people. About 2 years ago, I left AIP after being the CEO there to go start my own company called Super Mega Boss, which is a little weird and a little fun. And it's kind of based on the premise of manager training could be a lot more interesting than it currently is, because work is really weird sometimes and leading people is weird. And so I've gone full weird and geeky. And that's what I'm doing these days, is working on training managers and blending in a little bit of the weirdness that comes from it. So that's what I'm doing these days. But the book definitely stems from the adventure side of me, which is still going strong. I just don't do it for for a living as much anymore.
So, what are some of the craziest adventures that you've been on, or like what is one that just stands out in mind as being like this is probably one of the dumber things that I've done when it comes to an adventure?
So it's funny because it's all in perspective, and I think the one that stands out and is actually the cover of the book is an adventure I went on with my co-author and 11 other people. We went to cross Baffin Island, which is the fifth largest island in the world, and it's in the Canadian Arctic. So it's just south of the North Pole. And we, as a team, decided we were going to cross this island on foot in winter. And so we hit temperatures of 40 below zero, and we, camped, had threats of polar bears. We worked with a lot of the locals who live up there to go on this expedition, and it was some tough stuff. It was a combination of snowshoeing and ice crampons and a lot of hard work to cross this giant mountain pass. And it's a place that I'd just couldn't believe how absolutely beautiful it was, but it was definitely a harsh environment where the weather changed very, very quickly. And so we took the team of 11 sort of ranged from someone who essentially has the Guinness Book of World Record to the South Pole to someone who had never been camping before.
Oh my
So we
gosh.
had a very wide range of people on the team, and Kevin was actually my co-author, was the expedition lead, and I sort of was the production lead because we actually filmed everything that we did to make an adventure simulation out of it as well. So it was a crazy trip, but the place in of itself was so beautiful and stunning. It's got these huge granite mountains that are twice the size of El Capitan in Yosemite, but no one really goes up there because it is very, very harsh climate. So, but it was amazing.
So, how is it you go from never camping to doing something like that? Like that's a rude awakening.
Um, no, well, and it's funny because so the person who was on the trip with us, she was up for anything. She had a really positive attitude, and I think that served her really well because she wasn't even the one who struggled the most on the trip. She had such a great attitude, was open for anything, but knew she was going to have to struggle. I mean, everyone had sort of feet full of blisters, were doing these very long walks in very cold weather. She had a really open mind, and she had confidence in, people weren't going to let her, get into a dangerous situation. And if she did, she knew she had a team of people who were going to help her out of it. So she had that confidence in, hey, you know what? I'm going to learn from experts. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to try something new. And being the sort of fun and adventurous young person that she is, it was hilarious because her parents weren't so stoked. I remember her saying, like, my mom is very nervous for me. I'm like, of course, every mom is nervous for all of us, but we will take good care of you. Yes, there are threats. Here's how we have mitigated our risk. Do you feel comfortable going? Here are the things to tell your mom. And so, because the fact that we had mitigated our risk and had a plan for just about anything, she was good to go. And she had a great time. And I interviewed her at sort of the end of the trip, and she just couldn't believe that she had done it and kind of broke down into tears and was just amazed at the opportunity to go experience this and to push herself. And that was for me really cool to watch someone sort of go from never been camping, didn't know how to set up a tent, was afraid of the stove to, feeling really confident in her skills and capabilities and ability to sort of push through tough things. And that was awesome to watch. As a leader myself, it's like the best moment.
Oh, I imagine. And I know I've been, primitive hiking and camping before, and there is somewhat of a rude awakening the first time you realize, like, oh, I've got to, go use the bathroom outside, or I've got to, fix my own food, and there's no,
Yep.
or find my own water and purify it. And it gets a little freaky at those moments. But you definitely come out with a sense of accomplishment, and you learn a lot about not just yourself, but also how to handle adversity and to move forward when you're in a situation like that.
For sure. And I think that she grew so much from and it doesn't take long, right? 10 days out in the wilderness like that. doing tough things, you learn a lot. You have to pick up those skills quickly because it's life or death. Because if you think about your sort of camping trip, if you multiply that by 10, that's what you get in the Arctic because the conditions change so quickly. They are absolutely brutal. I mean, I think we had maybe 3 sunny days, and even the sunny days aren't warm. So it's just, being able to suffer a little bit and realize that you're stronger than you think you are. I love going out on trips like that to remind myself of, there's strength and there's capabilities that you just didn't think you had, and they come out and you figure it out, and it can be a lot of fun. And we had a really great group of humans on that trip.
So when you finish something like that, are you more grateful for things that you have in your everyday life, or does it increase your gratitude some?
Oh, by leaps and bounds, because I remember a few things on the return back, and just remembering like what it feels like for that whole trip. There was a moment of about 7 to 10 minutes every day where you felt warm. And that was right when you woke up and you were in your sleeping bag and you had it all closed up, and you could just feel every part of your body. And that was 10 minutes a day, and that's pretty much all you got. And so I just remember when we got into the town of Pangerton where we ended our trip, and we went into um the small sort of guest house that we stayed in, and it was warm, and it was just an odd feeling to be warm for more than 10 minutes, and you're just like, this feels amazing. Like everything becomes that much more amazing and you're grateful for it. And then, being in a town like that, and we had sort of a double dose of it because the people who live up there are incredibly hardy human beings, and to learn their stories and talk to them about what it's like you just get even more gratitude by realizing like, okay, I have a really privileged life, and I'm so grateful for everything that I have. When this is a very hard life and struggle when you live up in climates like this and don't have enough to eat, and it's cold all the time and dark for half the year. So yeah, there's a deep gratitude you have when you go exploring, doing something else, seeing a different part of the world. And I've always sort of thought that. I mean, I'm addicted to traveling and exploring places. I've been to 70 plus countries. I'm on a plane constantly. I just love to explore and see new places and get those feelings and those moments of like, oh, this is something to learn. This is something to take away. This is something to appreciate. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something you get out of those trips. Not only the personal growth, but also that gratitude that you talk about. In the book,
Yeah.
well, first let's ask, why did you decide to write this book? Like, what was the reasons behind putting something like this on paper?
So that's a great question. And I think the book has been something since I started working in the adventure space. It was like, oh, there's so many parallels between the experiences that I've had out in the mountains or on these adventures, and how closely they relate to how teams operate in the business world and how many teams that I've worked with. Like there's something that I think people could learn a lot from, and just use the adventure world as a different context to think about how they operate, how they work, how they communicate, how they make decisions, and how they persist in difficulty. And I had a couple of not false starts, but like I couldn't figure out how to get the book done, and how I wanted to frame it. And so it turns out that one of my fellow colleagues and my co-author Kevin and I were at a conference a couple of years ago, in 2018, and we were at a booth talking about adventure and talking about what we did for a living. And our we met, who now is our editor. She was looking for book ideas, and so it was, the universe sending a clear message. And she's like, this looks really interesting. Have you guys written a book about it? And we said no. And she said, do you want to write a book about it? This would be a good idea. So it was great because it all sort of started that idea that we had something that was interesting for the business readers, who are basically our primary audience, but also we wanted to write something that turned into a really interesting and story filled book, because stories and emotional stories, they're much more memorable. And so we decided to sort of combine our adventure backgrounds and business experience with my neuroscience, and created these chapters that have kind of a little bit for everybody, and really, went about writing the book for the bulk of last year, and we're excited about it, and actually had a lot of fun writing it, because it was finally sort of putting the things that we knew from stories of people that we're close to, and what lessons we can learn from the adventures that they had. And so it was a little bit of luck of being in the right place at the right time, for sure, but it was always something that, since we had been working in this adventure space and with businesses, and had so much enthusiasm for the idea of bringing the adventure world into the business arena, it sort of was bound to happen, and I'm glad it happened the way that it did. And yeah, the reception to it has been really positive.
Well, that's good. I know I get lots of books kind of mailed to me, and some of them I will look at and just kind of set aside. Some of them I'll pick up and be like, okay, I've got to check this one out. And when I saw this cover of this one, Wild Success, and it had the the people walking through, are you on the cover, or is that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So the cover is Kevin's in the front, and then I am the second to the last.
Okay.
And it's basically in front of this giant granite face, and it's a very cold landscape, and we are very bundled up and walking with our sleds. We dragged 100-pound sleds across that mountain pass, and it was yeah, that's us on the cover, and it was very cold that day.
So I picked it up and I started reading it. And as I started reading, I thought, you know what? I want to hear this, because these stories, for me anyway, I'm more of an audible person, because I'm listening, I listen to podcasts, I make podcasts. So I'm more of an auditory learner. So when I started reading it, I thought, I'm going to go get this on Audible, because I want to hear these stories. I want to hear, I want to hear the inflection in the people's voices as they're, talking about how, a big surfer breaking his leg, and
Yeah.
hearing someone getting ready to go on this trip of a lifetime after getting laid off, and then all of a sudden they're told, no, you can't do it, right at the last moment. And, just hearing these things, and hearing the grit and the perseverance as you overcome something like this, I thought was really impactful for me, and it is very memorable. A lot of these stories seem to, talk about grit and overcoming something that's very challenging, and how you can take that back into the business world. What are some examples that are maybe in the book or outside of the book that you've seen, where people have had to overcome something and been able to take that knowledge of how they overcame something outside of business and bring it into leadership and management in the business world?
Yeah, I think now is a great time to think about these topics, because I think all of us are doing some of that. But
Hmm.
the two chapters that kind of jump out at me, that I've been talking to people a lot, are around cognitive reappraisal. So Mark Matthews, who is a amazing big wave surfer, he's a championship surfer. He has been through a lot in his life in terms of wipeouts, and it's such a good parallel, because it's not sort of if you're going to have a wipeout, it's when, and you've got to face those things sort of head on. And Mark's got a really, number one, a great attitude. Like, you'd think he's sort of quintessential surfer, but he's a really deep human being. And he and I talk about the brain, and it's really fascinating, because he is really tuned into when he has those challenges, and facing the fear of the unknown, and facing things with a sort of reappraised attitude, and thinking what good can come from this? How can I do better? How can I recover? Because he's had quite a few setbacks. He had broken his arm. He had a really bad leg injury, and so part of it was he flips that switch so quickly, because he always sort of looks at the bright side of life. And it was funny, because I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh, that chapter made me think of that Monty Python song, and it's now stuck in my head." And so part of it is reappraising when you have a setback, and being able to reappraise during small setbacks, which really essentially is sort of dealing with your emotional response to something that's negative, and then responding in a way that's positive, that's optimistic, that knows that struggle is a part of life, that you have to, as a leader, as a human, take and deal with, and realize that it does make you stronger, it does make you more capable. Um, that that reappraising and looking at the optimism and what you can take from a situation and learn from it is really key. And so that one, I think, is really important, as is resilience, and they both sort of fall and are complementary to each other. But resilience, there's a story of a woman who is just a firecracker of a human being. Her name's Lisa Blair, and she is a solo ocean sailor, and she has taken on some of these absolutely crazy adventures. She has circumnavigated both Antarctica and Australia by herself. And she's funny because she talks like, "Oh, I'm just an ordinary person, and I'm no sort of superhuman. I just go do these things because I want to go deep, and I really want to understand like how humans deal with adversity, but also, do things that are bigger than myself." And so she is a really resilient human being and is always sort of planning around her trips, like what are the worst case scenarios? How do I be prepared for that? And so that planning mindset, like, yes, she takes on enormous risk, but she mitigates it so well. And when things go bad, and in the book, I kind of we outlined something that happened to her that went real south and not good. Her ability to realize, like, you know what, this has happened. This is how I'm going to handle it. I'm gonna fix it, work through it, not get too down on it, realize that, I can have these conversations. I've got my family who supports me. Her mom is an anchor in her life, and she gets through it. And so her ability to sort of hope for the best, plan for the worst, and use the people in her life to really bolster her when things go down, and the haters are going to hate because she got a lot of flack for some of the decisions she made. She was just really resilient in being able to bounce back. She doesn't give up, and she's in a field that a sort of sparky young woman like has to fight and punch up a lot. And so her resilience is just amazing, and her story was so great that we wanted to share it. And really, resilience is part of business because there are upturns and downturns, and part of it is thinking about how you want to show up in those moments, not just react, but actually planfully and thoughtfully respond to them.
Yeah, and I thought that was like a cognitive reappraisal. You talk about that in the book, and it's one of those things that I've never really thought about how it was, codified. I've always thought, well, look at what could have happened and think about, how much better off you are now. Look at it in a different light, those kind of things. But when you talk about the actual, I guess I want to say science behind it, and
Hmm.
it makes a lot more sense, and it's so much easier to say, okay, so whenever I am feeling this way, let me take a step back and look at it from other perspectives and reassess my current situation from another perspective and see how I can use this information in a different way. And being able to do that kind of takes the negative emotional immediate reaction that you may have out of it,
Yeah.
and it makes me reassess a lot of things in my life in a more positive way. Like, for example, this whole COVID-19, we moved into a new house. I
Right.
purchased a new house right as this was happening. I think I told you about that. And then
Yeah.
initially I was like, well, this is terrible. This is the worst timing for any of this to happen. But
Why did I
after,
do this?
yeah, exactly, and then right after this, now when I look back at it, I was like, well, this is actually perfect timing. Now we have plenty of time to, get the shelves put up, get the light fixtures changed, get the curtains hung, get everything we need to do at the new house completed. And we don't have to worry about, let's get it all, let's rush and do this because we have soccer to go to, or baseball and all these
Yeah.
different activities, because they're all canceled now. So now we're at home and now we have time. And it actually worked out really well when you look at it from a different perspective.
And that's the thing, like, you can really that's where the science, I think, is really helpful for a lot of people, because you can put words to what's happening to you, and you can put words to the process that you're following and the habits that you form to work through things that I think, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when the science wasn't as solid and as prevalent as it is now, we didn't have words for it. We just would respond or react to something, and it is what it is. Like, we had lots of excuses for people being ill behaved at work because we couldn't put words to it on why they were doing what they were doing. But yeah, I feel like these tools that we have, and thanks to the science behind it, to be able to break it down and understand what's happening in our brains, particularly when the emotions happen, because those are the tough things, and being able to then take that step back, take some really good action that's based in science, and you're willing to experiment with it because somebody's proven it's true, and to geek out like that. Brain science has been so helpful, even in my own behaviors and what I talk with clients of mine. It gives people a different set of tools that we know work and are worth trying, instead of just sort of ignoring it, passing it by, panicking about something. It's just been really helpful. And I think, yeah, from a COVID-19 standpoint, I think I've been talking to a lot of people about like what's the good that can come from this. And people, I know it's been a long time for a lot of people that are stuck at home, and part of it is like what can you be grateful for there, and how does that gratitude come into play, and how can you reappraise it? Like what can you do differently? Is this time for you to develop and learn? Is this time for you to take time out and spend it with your family, to take time out and exercise? Like there's a lot of goodness that if we dig a little deeper and take that step back, we can find from any situation. And not to be like Pollyanna about it, because I got my bad days too, but I think these tools give people a much deeper toolkit to deal with the setbacks in life. And the adventure stories are just a way to sort of give you a platform to get into it. And so we didn't want to make something like too sciencey, because the first couple of goes at writing, I got real deep and real geeky, and Kevin was really helpful because he's like, no, we got to go a layer up. Like you're going real deep on the brain science. I'm like, I can't help myself. I'm a nerd. But I mean, part of it is giving people some real tactical tools to think about and to try and to experiment with, because that at the end of the day is kind of the hope that you're going to use these stories and have you go, oh, okay, maybe I think about this differently than ignore it or pass it by. Like everything is an opportunity to sort of see how else you might respond to a situation.
Yeah, I definitely think that that makes a huge impact. And even with this, COVID-19, there's so many small things that you can think about. And you mentioned what are the good that's going to come out of this. Well, there's so much good that's already came out of it. There's so many families that are spending
Yeah.
time together that never do. There's a lot of things that I'm going to miss about when things do, go back to somewhat normal, if they do. There's a lot of things that I'm going to miss about being
I've been
here.
using the phrase like next phase versus new
Yeah.
normal or things like that. Like things that don't aren't going to probably feel normal for a while, and that's okay. But like the next phase, what do we got in front of us, right?
Hmm.
Like it's an interesting perspective. I'm with you. I think it's if you can take that, and it's harder. I mean, I'm very privileged and acknowledge it. Like it's going to be harder for a lot of other people to get through this, and there's lots of very
Hmm.
difficult situations out there. It's not to ignore those, but I think you're right. Like as humans, we can all sort of pick the things that are helpful and good from it.
Yeah, for sure. When you're looking at doing these adventures and that you talk about in the book, and I know most of the books are just about stories about individual ones and how you can relate that back. But when you go on something like this with a team, is there a bond built between those people that kind of lasts for a long time, or is there some kind of advantage for going with friends, or is it better to go with strangers? What are your thoughts on things like that?
Well, it's really interesting because it's I think anytime you take a group of people and you put them through a testing environment and challenge, like you do forge those bonds, you connect. And I know that some of my closest friends are the ones that I've been in the toughest situations with, both work-wise and adventure-wise. And I think that shared experiences are huge for people to create those bonds and those friendships. And there's something about having that shared experience, shared language that you go through, that's important. Now, that's not to say it's interesting. So the Baffin trip in particular, we had assembled a group of people. We weren't necessarily friends beforehand. We had a purpose, and so we had people that we worked with because that was part of the job, but also a couple of guys that we knew from previous adventures who were really good at. We had a cameraman and a filmmaker with us who were awesome people who Kevin and I had met on a previous adventure in New Zealand, who we just got along with and were great friends and had been on all these adventures. We had a few others on the team. We brought a client for the first time, which was interesting. So somebody who came from the business world, and we plunked him into the adventure world. He had a bit of an outdoor experience, so that was really helpful. And then we had a few other people in the mix. A friend of mine who I had worked with before, who I knew she's a feisty personality, and that came to bear. And not everybody gets along, and so part of it is, I think it's always interesting to take people on these shared experiences because we all had different lenses and perspectives around them. I tend to to spend time with people who are very different from me in one way or another. So I might be a little weird in that. I like to sort of get different perspectives and different takes on things. And sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes you have conflict, but I'm okay with that. Like I think it's a richer experience because they're usually funnier and more interesting stories to tell. Because if you always spend time just with the people that you know and the people who are like you, I think it closes off your perspective on the world. So I'm always about like taking people who haven't had these types of experiences and doing something different with them. And maybe, it's a shock to their system and they may not be real happy about it to begin with, but I know they grow from it and they may not grow how I want them to grow, but it makes for interesting living and interesting stories. So yeah, I mean, I'll go on other adventures, short things. I do a lot of sort of backpacking out in the Sierras, and I always sort of look for people to come with who are up for a good adventure. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I've got a litany of these adventure stories with people who go do some fun stuff, and I think you share those moments with people, and I those are the stories that I think sort of make life worth living.
Yeah, for sure. I know, and in my opinion, you can have these like mini adventures too that are just like going into a mud run or something like that. That's exciting and way out of your comfort zone if it's not something you normally do,
Hmm.
as well as doing something that's very dangerous and exciting and challenging that challenges you to another level. But I think there's all kinds of different things, and it's important for people to. I like the phrase to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. And I think
Yes,
when you do something like that, it helps you not just in life, but also in business and leadership, because a lot of leadership tactics are just they're uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to have one-on-ones. It's
like you're
uncomfortable to
uncomfortable
challenge
all the
people.
time. Like you're
Yeah,
all the time. Like if you're a leader and you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong. Like
exactly.
I know that feeling of just, and it's not anxiety, but it is a discomfort in realizing that you're putting yourself out there, especially if you're an introvert, which I kind of am. It's tough, and I feel like that going out into the adventure situations actually helps you keep playing and okay, and I can work through it. So I'm with you. I'm pretty comfortable with discomfort and eke it out. And it's funny because a lot of adventurers also sort of feel the same way. And I think it's helpful. And I think it helps you be a bit more gritty as a leader and persistent because like, okay, I can sit in this feeling and know that that's an okay place to be and I'm not in any sort of danger, and it's weird things are going to happen and I can be okay with it.
Yeah, for sure. I know, like, and I've been able to take things like when I ran my first marathon probably 10 years ago. It was just I did that, and I was able to say, okay, since if I can do that, I can hold a one-on-one. I can translate something that's
Right.
physically difficult. I can do something that's not as difficult physically, but maybe a little bit more mentally difficult for me. Being introverted and not wanting to challenge people or something like that. But yeah, so being able to translate things that you do from a physical standpoint to a leadership standpoint, I think is really important as well.
I agree, and I think that that's helped a lot of people that I know when I've suggested, because there are a lot of people when they hear like background in adventure, that I always ask people like, what's your greatest adventure? And most of them come up with something that's very adventurous. I mean, the other thing is like everything's an adventure. You can also look at it that way. I
Hmm.
mean, raising kids, picking up a new role, switching jobs, like they're all mini adventures. So it's, if you kind of take that adventurer mindset, you're in a good place because you can see everything as a thing to learn and experience and grow from, and not to be terrified by.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what kind of advice do you have? Because a lot of our listeners are new leaders in technology. Maybe they're a first-time team lead or a first-time manager, and this, COVID-19 thing may be their first big adventure when it comes to management or leadership. What pieces of advice would you have for someone maybe in that role to make sure they're doing it right?
Um, the first thing I think is like taking away the definition that you've got to do things right. Like you're going to make mistakes
Mm,
and you're going to grow from them. And I think that's an important thing, is to just try and try and experiment with different ways that you can work with your team, with the people that you're coaching, with the people that you're working with, that you're reaching across an organization, that you're collaborating, that you're communicating differently. Like part of me is, try lots of different things because your toolkit needs to be pretty expansive to be a good leader. I think being open to input and feedback from others at all levels is a really big thing, because I noticed one of the things that people struggle with is the discomfort around giving and receiving feedback and input, because it can be really sensitive. And so part of the idea is to just get really comfortable with asking people and making it, the more you ask for input from people, like, what do you think on how I did this? And what do you think about my approach? Like, getting that input makes it then much easier for you to give that input to others when you need to, and it's uncomfortable. Because I know that's a real struggle space for a lot of the managers and new managers that I talk to. And part of it is just seeking out growing and learning and having sort of that growth mindset. Really does help, and seeing everything as a learning situation, but not realizing like you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to get everything right. You have to try, you have to do your best, you have to work hard, and you have to seek that input and feedback to know that you can always get better. And knowing that like there's not an upper limit is a really helpful thing. Like there's always different ways of doing things, and taking that time to be easy on yourself, to know that you're not going to be perfect, but also to encourage yourself to try things, to take action, to have those conversations, I think is really helpful, especially in uncertainty. The other piece of it is also realizing you have to take care of yourself, because when things like this happen and there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress, our physical systems, like they can't deal with this level of stress forever. And so part of it is making sure like you are taking care of yourself. You are a network system. So if you want your brain to work at its best, you've got to make sure your physical health is good, and you've got to take your time to do that. Exercising, eating well, you've got to, think about potentially taking on things like mindfulness and getting your emotions in check. You've got to build good relationships, like realizing that all of those aspects of you as a human are really important once you observe a leadership role, and even more so when there's uncertainty and you're going to have that level of stress. Taking care of yourself and building that balance is really huge, I think, for any successful leader. And the earlier in your career you learn that, the better off you are, because you're not a machine, and you can't go 24/7 forever, because you will burn out.
Yeah, I always like the analogy that, you mentioned you fly a lot, or you did fly a lot, I guess. With the analogy, that they always say, put your oxygen mask on first. So before you can help others, you have to get that fuel in yourself first.
100%. Yeah, it's an analogy I use a lot too, because I'm always on airplanes, and my spouse is an airline pilot. So like literally, even for fun, I'm on airplanes all the time. And I think that's a huge thing. Like, you have to make sure that you are well equipped, and you can't burn yourself out, and you have to take that time and balance. And I noticed that even in the beginning of COVID, when everyone started working from home and they hadn't done that before, people were working too much. I'm like, no. The secret to working at home, which I've been doing for over a decade, is like, you don't work the whole time. You have to take those moments, and you have to work through a day that works for you, because you're not going to be on for 12 hours a day. You can't. It's just not possible. So you got to take advantage of the fact that you got to make these breaks in your day and take care of yourself. It's huge.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the leader's responsibility to let people know that, because I had some people on my team that I would send them a message and they would respond instantly. And I had to say, hey, look, it's okay if you want to get up and take a walk and you want to go for a break. You don't have to be on front of your computer responding immediately. I take my kids for, a walk and a bike ride every day during the middle of the day when I'd normally be at the office, because those are times that I need breaks, and I'm going to take a break. And you should do the same, because if you're just right there glued, you're going to burn out. You're going to resent it. You're going to not be happy.
You're not going to, yeah, well, and that, not even only that, you're not going to produce the same quality of work output. You're not going to be as innovative. Like, you sacrifice things when you do that. And I think people think, oh, if I work, like, that's a value to my organization. And it's actually not. You're not going to be as productive and effective if you don't do those things. And I think you're right, as a leader, communicating that and setting a good example of it, and making it okay, because oftentimes we see a lot of fear-based leadership in organizations, and it's not about that. It's, you don't work well under fear. You can't innovate under fear. Right. So I think communicating and being open and transparent is really a big piece of that.
I agree 100%. Do you have any other last pieces of advice for people? And also, don't forget to tell people how they can pick up your book and maybe connect with you and find out more about your company and what you're doing.
Absolutely. So I part of it is just take that adventurer's mindset. Like just try it on for size. Like, yeah, you don't, maybe you haven't been on a great big outdoors adventure, but what is the adventure that you're having day to day, right? Like how do you look at what you're doing as something to learn and grow from and to be able to apply in different contexts. So I think that's a great sort of hat to try on for a little while and see if it fits. If people want more in terms of the book, we have a website, morewildsuccess.com, that you can pick up the book. Would love for them to do that. You can also, as you did, get the Audible version on at your favorite booksellers, whoever that may be. And that was a really interesting thing to try and select someone to read your book for you, which is fun because it's not us reading. We wanted a really dramatic voice, so that was fun. And then if you are interested in some of the things I'm doing from a manager development standpoint and some weirdness, you can check me out at supermegaboss.com.
All right, and I'll link all those up in the show notes at geekleader.com. And I have the hardcover and the Audible version, so definitely check those out. They're fantastic. Amy, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, and I wish you all the success.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Amy, and if so, please leave a review in Apple Podcasts, and as well as wherever else you listen to your podcast, whether it be Spotify or Overcast or whatever player you're listening to. I'd love it if you leave a review, click one of the stars, or give me a 5-star rating or something like that. That'd be very encouraging. And also, don't forget you can get your discount from Virtual Private Internet at geekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's Virtual Private Internet for only $3.33 a month. Surf the web securely with geekleader.com/VPN.